In April of 2026, in an industrial neighborhood on the edge of Nairobi, more than 1,100 people walked out of an office building for the last time. They had spent their days looking at things nobody wants to look at. Violent images, hate speech, text that a machine could not be trusted to judge alone. They had labeled that content so that other software running on servers in California could learn what was safe and what was not. Their employer was a company called Sama. It had run some of the most notorious contracts in the short history of the generative AI industry, including the labeling work that made the first version of ChatGPT publishable. The workers who had done that job had already sued. Then, in April, Meta ended a major moderation contract, and 1,108 jobs in Nairobi disappeared in a single announcement. A few kilometers away, in a much smaller building, a Finnish-Kenyan company called Fuzu was quietly doing the same category of work and quietly building a very different version of it. For 11 years, Fuzu had been an online jobs marketplace. Now, months after that rival's mass layoff, Fuzu was surfacing a new division called Atlas, selling managed African teams to Microsoft, to MasterCard, to global clients across the artificial intelligence industry. It was a pivot the founder himself refused to call a pivot. This is the story of Fuzu, the company built from a single moment when 1,500 people applied for one Nairobi driver job, the company that outlasted a decade of African online recruitment failures on less capital than most of its rivals had already lost, and the company that read the disruption of its own category by generative AI and decided to move into the machinery of generative AI itself. Hi again, welcome back to the pod. My name is Farouk, and today we are going deep into the story of Fuzu. This is the story of two Finns and one Nairobi driver hire that turned into 1,500 CVs, a jobs marketplace that survived a decade of African online recruitment failures on around €5.5 million of funding, and a 2026 pivot into the guts of the AI industry, executed a few kilometers from where, months earlier, a rival had laid off more than 1,000 workers in a single announcement. Let's get into it. The origin of Fuzu does not begin with a jobs marketplace. It begins with a driver. In 2010, Nokia was still the largest handset maker in Africa. Its research center in Nairobi, opened 2 years earlier, was the largest single research and development investment by any Western technology company on the continent. That year, Nokia was hosting an open innovation conference in Nairobi, and a Finnish vice president named Jussi Hinkanen was responsible for the logistics. The conference needed a driver for VIP transportation. The team posted the job. Approximately 1,500 CVs came back. 1,500 CVs for one low-skill role. There was no way to read them, no way to verify them, no way to rank them, no way even to call the applicants back. Somewhere in that pile was the right person, but the infrastructure to find that person did not exist. Hinkanen and his colleague Jussi Impio, the founder of Nokia's Nairobi Research Center, spent the next 2 to 3 years turning that gap into a thesis. The African labor market was not short of talent. It was short of the machinery to match talent to opportunity at scale. Hinkanen was not a stereotypical technology executive. He had studied industrial economics in Finland, then spent much of his early career in Mozambique, advising the Ministry of Science and Technology, running the country's research and education network, working with the United Nations Development Program, and leading a $30 million World Bank project on electronic government infrastructure. He had built things in African economies before he ever sold a phone. When Microsoft acquired Nokia's handset division, he stayed through the transition. Then, in 2013, he quit Microsoft entirely. He and Impio incorporated Fuzu in Helsinki. The company would be Finnish on paper, Kenyan in practice, and dual hub from day one. For 2 years, the company built quietly. Hinkanen took the CEO title in 2014. The team hired a Kenyan operator named Robert Kimani, who had until then been the chief executive of Brighter Monday, one of the leading incumbent Kenyan job boards. That single hire was a statement. Fuzu's first senior Kenyan leader came out of the exact category Fuzu was about to disrupt. On the 17th of September, 2015, Fuzu launched publicly at the Fairmont Norfolk Hotel in Nairobi. Guests included the Rockefeller Foundation, the mobile phone financier M-Kopa, and Equity Bank. Within 40 days, the platform had 30,000 Kenyan users. The category Fuzu had chosen was already visibly a graveyard. The Swiss publisher Ringier owned Brighter Monday in Kenya and Jobberman in Nigeria under a holding company called One Africa Media. In December of 2016, only 15 months after Fuzu launched, Ringier shut Brighter Monday Rwanda and Cheki Tanzania and closed operations in Zimbabwe and Zambia. Kenyan startup Kuhustle, launched the year before Fuzu, had already pivoted away from its original model after quality of service complaints and would never scale. Across the continent, the online jobs category was old, unloved, and losing money. Into that graveyard, Fuzu was about to double down. To understand what Fuzu was up against, understand the economics of an African jobs marketplace. Job seekers get everything for free because charging them means locking out the exact audience the platform is supposed to serve. So, the money has to come from employers. And African small businesses have infinite substitutes. They can post on LinkedIn. They can drop a message into a WhatsApp group. They can ask their church. They can put up a notice at the corner shop. Meanwhile, every online listing competes with a huge secondary economy of WhatsApp job scams that has trained job seekers to distrust every offer they see. That is the terrain. Charging small employers for something they can already do informally in a market where jobs are as likely to be fake as real. Fuzu's answer was to build a product wide enough to survive that pressure. Job seekers got a free profile, a free skills assessment, a free personality assessment, a CV builder, a learning marketplace called Fuzu Learn, and a community forum where the founder himself ran public question and answer sessions. Employers were charged in 3 tiers: a starter plan from around $60 per job posting, a pro plan from $300 per month for teams that hired regularly, and a top tier called Elite from $600 per successful hire, with a dedicated recruiter and a replacement guarantee. Everything on the platform was designed to make the free product so good that employers would eventually pay for the pipe of talent flowing through it. In December of 2016, Fuzu closed its first institutional round, €1.75 million. The lead was FinFund, the Finnish development finance institution. Alongside came the Finnish staffing group Barona and a Finnish angel vehicle called Polkuni. By the close of that round, roughly 180,000 Kenyans had registered on the platform. By late 2017, that number had crossed 500,000. In 2018, Fuzu launched in Uganda. The team was around 26 people, most of them in Nairobi, a handful of engineers in Helsinki. While Fuzu grew, its peers kept dying. Kuhustle never recovered. Link, the Kenyan informal services marketplace, was eventually sold in 2022 to a Nigerian startup called Eden Life in what was widely read as a distressed exit. Ringier consolidated its remaining African job boards under a new brand called the African Talent Company, propped up by a MasterCard Foundation grant subsidy. The South African cleaning services marketplace Sweep South raised $11 million from investors, entered Kenya and Nigeria, and withdrew from both within months, citing global macroeconomic conditions. Every one of these was a company that had raised more money than Fuzu, launched louder than Fuzu, and lost. Fuzu's edge was that it had never tried to grow at the pace those companies had tried to grow. It was small, it was patient, and it was still there. The first real turn came on the 10th of March, 2020. Fuzu closed a Series A of €3.4 million, roughly $3.9 million. The lead was SparkMind, a Nordic education technology fund. FinFund followed on. So did Cornerstone Enterprises in Kenya, the Japanese corporate vehicle, Arkfan Incubate, the Swiss firm SeedStars International, and Keppel Africa Ventures out of Japan. The plan was clear: build artificial intelligence into the recruitment product. Launch Nigeria. The Series A closed just as the world began to lock down. Kenya, Uganda, and Nigeria all went into some form of restriction. Every startup on the continent had to make a decision about how much of its runway to burn preserving jobs versus preserving cash. Fuzu is not known to have run public layoffs during this period. Its name does not appear in any of the layoff trackers that captured the sector's pain. Instead, the company kept building. In 2021, it launched in Nigeria, hiring a country director named Patricia Duru to lead the market. In 2022, it released a mobile app. Internally, an operator named Muthoni Mathenj led an overhaul of the business model that FinFund would later credit with increasing revenue by 50%. In September of 2022, Fuzu topped up its balance sheet again. This time, FinFund put in €500,000 as part of a broader mezzanine facility alongside SparkMind. This was not a priced equity round. It was a bridge, and it would turn out to be the last piece of new institutional capital Fuzu would take for years. Then, in 2023, something quietly appeared on the company's product roadmap. It was called Fuzu Global Workforce. On the surface, it was a way for European and American employers to hire African talent remotely. Underneath, it was the seed of something much larger. Fuzu had begun building the machinery of a services business, not just a marketplace. While Fuzu built quietly, the rest of the African job tech industry was collapsing loudly. In March of 2024, Remotasks, the annotation arm of the American company Scale AI, abandoned Kenya, Nigeria, and Pakistan almost overnight, stranding thousands of gig workers who had built their income around the platform. Around the same time, Sama was still absorbing the fallout of a lawsuit brought by a former content moderator named Daniel Motong, followed by a class action by more than 140 former Meta moderators. All of these were companies that had chosen to compete on volume and price. Fuzu, watching, was choosing the opposite path. In early 2026, Fuzu Global Workforce was rebranded as Fuzu Atlas. The new positioning was direct. Atlas was a governed AI data operations division, not a gig platform, not a micro-work marketplace. A managed service that ran multilingual data operations, evaluation of large language models, safety review, multimodal annotation of images and video, and audit-oriented expert oversight for regulated use cases. Delivery pods were live in Nairobi, in Lagos, in Cairo, in Sofia, and in Buenos Aires, with Helsinki as the group headquarters. The vocabulary was chosen with care. Every marketing page used the words governed, expert in the loop, and compliance-aware. Those words were, quite deliberately, the opposite of everything Sama had been criticized for. The client roster Fuzu was willing to name publicly was Blue Chip, Microsoft, DHL, Heineken, Airtel, MasterCard, Unilever. The company said it had worked with more than 2,000 organizations. What is worth noticing is what was not on that list. No Frontier AI Lab, no OpenAI, no Anthropic, no Meta, no Scale AI. Either the lab side work is under confidentiality, which is standard in this industry, or Fuzu's real book of business is enterprise clients doing artificial intelligence adjacent work rather than the training of frontier models. The truth is probably somewhere in between, and the company has never clarified it. Then, in the week of the 6th of July, 2026, two things happened at once. The JobTech Alliance, an initiative of Mercy Corps and BFA Global, announced a catalytic investment in Fuzu. The size was not disclosed. A companion investment in a Kenyan retail startup called Kiosk was announced the same day. The JobTech Alliance had, 1 year earlier, published a sector-wide research paper arguing that generative AI was gutting the low end of African digital work and that the resilient future belonged to what it called demand-led managed service platforms that embed quality control, accountability, and human oversight. That paragraph read like a description of what Fuzu Atlas had just publicly launched. At the same time, the Fuzu Atlas landing page went public, and this is where the pivot got interesting. The founder, Hinkanen, refused to call it a pivot. His public posts on the company's 10th anniversary in 2025 spoke only of continuity, of the people who had built the company, of the next chapter of the future of work. The word pivot came from outside. It came from Nick Markham, the JobTech Alliance investment lead, who told the press, quote, "Most African talent platforms still operate as marketplaces, competing on volume and cheaper sourcing. Fuzu has already moved past that," end quote. The founder spoke continuity. Third parties spoke transition. That gap was not an accident. Which brings us to today. Fuzu, in 2026, is two companies living inside one. On one side sits the original marketplace, still running in Kenya, in Uganda, in Nigeria. Fuzu's own About page continues to call the platform Africa's #1 career platform, and job seekers on the site would notice no difference. On the other side sits Atlas, the higher value services business, quietly signing contracts with global enterprises and slowly building out an alternative to the low-wage model that has defined African AI data work for a decade. The financial picture is unusually thin for a company this old. Roughly €5.5 million in disclosed institutional capital across 11 years. No priced round since March of 2020. No valuation ever published. No revenue ever disclosed. That absence of a fresh priced round in the years around the pivot is itself a signal. Either Fuzu chose not to raise, or the market did not offer terms Fuzu was willing to accept. Either way, the Atlas pivot is not a bet made from a position of abundance. It is a bet made because the classic marketplace path, as every peer around Fuzu has just proven, no longer leads anywhere good. The open questions are the ones that will define the next 5 years. Can Atlas win real frontier AI work, or will it remain an enterprise vendor by another name? Can Fuzu preserve the marketplace's public trust while treating it, internally, as a talent funnel for a very different business? And can a company that spent a decade selling access to jobs in Kenya, in Uganda, in Nigeria, credibly sell the humans who train the models that will decide which of those jobs still exist in 10 years' time? The bet is unresolved. The pivot is underway. And unlike almost every peer that surrounded Fuzu when it launched, Fuzu is still there to make it. In 2010, a Finnish executive tried to hire one Nairobi driver and received 1,500 CVs. The answer to that problem became a company that survived a decade of African jobs marketplace failures on less capital than most of its rivals had lost, and then, in 2026, quietly reinvented itself into the machinery of the artificial intelligence industry that was gutting its original category. This is Asili Africa. Every empire has an origin. That is the story. And like every story worth telling, this one is still being written. If this episode made you see something differently, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I am Farouk. This is Asili Africa. Every empire has an origin. Now you know this one. So start building, because yours might be tomorrow's origin story. See you on the next one.